I found out my fiancé's in love with someone else because he said her name in his sleep the night before our engagement party. And the way he said it, soft, reverent, almost relieved, told me everything I needed to know long before I ever opened his phone or confronted him in the harsh clarity of morning light. His hand was draped across my waist, the diamond he had given me only a week earlier glinting faintly on my finger as moonlight filtered through the blinds, and when he whispered Elena like a prayer against my shoulder, my body went completely still, as if instinct understood before logic could catch up. My name is Tessa Monroe, and I'm not the kind of woman who pretends not to notice fractures. I catalog them, examine their edges, and decide whether the structure is worth salvaging. Lying there beside Caleb Whitaker, golden boy entrepreneur, philanthropist in curated doses, beloved by my parents and admired by half the city, I realized with a cold, almost clinical calm, that I had just discovered the fault line that would split my life clean in two. Caleb and I were the kind of couple people described as inevitable, which in hindsight should have been my first warning sign, because inevitability leaves very little room for curiosity or choice. We met in law school, competed for the same internships, studied side by side until rivalry blurred into chemistry, and eventually built a relationship that looked impeccable from the outside. Two ambitious, articulate people ascending in parallel, hosting tasteful dinner parties, discussing market trends over wine, mapping out a future that included a house in Brookhaven, and two children scheduled conveniently between career milestones. What we did not account for was the quiet erosion that happens when admiration replaces intimacy, when you start loving the idea of a partnership more than the person standing in front of you. I knew Caleb's reason better than I knew his fears. He knew my 5-year plan better than he knew what kept me awake at night. We were efficient. We were aligned. We were apparently not enough. I did not confront him immediately after he murmured her name. Instead, I lay awake until dawn, listening to his steady breathing and studying the ceiling as if it might offer counsel. By the time he woke, stretching and smiling at me with that practiced warmth, I had already decided to observe rather than accuse. There is power in information gathered quietly. Throughout the day, as caterers moved in and florists transformed our backyard into a cascade of white peonies and soft gold ribbon for the engagement party, I watched him with a new lens. Every buzz of his phone drew his attention a fraction too quickly. Every time he stepped away to take a call, his posture shifted less relaxed, more electric. And when a woman arrived just before sunset, tall and self-possessed with dark hair pinned loosely at her nape, and Caleb's entire face changed in a way I had never inspired, I knew her name before anyone spoke it. Elena Reyes, his new business partner. The one he'd mentioned casually over the past few months with a neutrality that now felt rehearsed. Elena was not what I expected. I had prepared myself to resent someone overtly glamorous or manipulative, someone easy to cast as a villain. Instead, she was composed, intelligent, and disarmingly sincere, congratulating us with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When she hugged Caleb, it lasted a beat too long, their bodies aligning with a familiarity that made my stomach tighten. I felt strangely detached, as though I were watching a play in which I had somehow forgotten my lines. Guests toasted us, my parents beamed, and Caleb gave a speech about partnership and destiny that would have moved me to tears if I hadn't been dissecting every inflection for signs of performance. When he slid his arm around my waist and called me the love of my life, I smiled for the cameras and wondered whether he even understood the weight of the words he was distributing so carelessly. The confrontation happened the next morning, stripped of party lights and polite applause. I placed his phone on the kitchen table between us, open to a thread of messages that were not explicitly incriminating, but pulsed with subtext inside jokes. Late-night confessions about stress, a photograph of a sunset captioned, "Wish you were here." I did not raise my voice. I simply asked, "Are you in love with her?" Caleb's reaction was not outrage or denial. It was silence, followed by a long exhale that sounded like surrender. He ran both hands through his hair, eyes fixed on the table, and in that posture I saw a man exhausted by his own duplicity. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said finally, which is perhaps the most infuriating sentence in the English language. As if love were a scheduling error. As if betrayal were an accidental miscalculation, rather than a series of deliberate choices. What I expected to feel was rage. What I felt instead was clarity so sharp it almost hummed. "Do you love her?" I repeated, and this time he nodded, barely perceptible but undeniable. There it was, the fracture fully exposed. He tried to explain that he loved me too, that what we had was stable and real and built on years of shared history, while what he felt for Elena was sudden and confusing and impossible to ignore. I listened without interruption, noticing how his arguments were structured like business pitches, weighing risk against reward, comfort against passion. When he reached for my hand, I withdrew it gently, not out of spite, but because I needed physical distance to match the emotional chasm opening between us. Leaving was not dramatic. I did not throw his ring at his face or pack my belongings in a flurry of tears. I removed the diamond carefully and set it on the counter, its brilliance suddenly cold and irrelevant. I told him I would stay with my sister for a while. He asked for time, for patience, for the opportunity to figure things out, as though I were an investor considering whether to fund his indecision. That was when a flicker of anger finally surfaced. "I am not an option you keep on hold while you test another future," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. For the first time since law school, Caleb Whitaker looked unsure of himself in my presence. My sister Rowan reacted with a fury I could not muster. She paced her living room, listing Caleb's virtues with venomous sarcasm, offering to slash tires or leak rumors or perform any number of theatrically vindictive acts. I surprised both of us by declining. "He didn't cheat in the dark," I said quietly. "He drifted in the open and I didn't see it." The truth was harder to articulate. Part of me had sensed the distance growing over the past year, the way our conversations had become more strategic than intimate, the way physical closeness sometimes felt like habit rather than hunger. Caleb's feelings for Elena were not a lightning strike, they were a symptom. And if I was honest, I had contributed to the environment that allowed them to flourish. Weeks passed without resolution. Caleb texted sporadically, oscillating between apologies and declarations of confusion. I heard through mutual friends that he and Elena were spending increasing amounts of time together, though nothing had been publicly acknowledged. I focused on my work at the public defender's office, a career path that had always set me slightly apart from Caleb's corporate ambitions, and poured myself into cases that demanded presence and compassion. In courtrooms heavy with tension and uncertainty, I found a strange solace. Here, at least, the stakes were explicit. The lines between harm and healing were visible. Then, one evening, Elena appeared outside my office. She did not arrive defensively or triumphantly. She looked tired, her usual composure frayed at the edges. "I owe you an apology," she began, and I almost laughed at the understatement. We sat across from each other in the small conference room where I typically prepared clients for testimony, and she told me that she had not known the depth of Caleb's dissatisfaction until he confided in her. She admitted that her feelings had grown gradually, against her better judgment, and that she had encouraged him to tell me the truth rather than prolong the charade. "I don't want to build something on the ruins of something else," she said, and there was no malice in her voice, only a weary sincerity that disarmed me. It would have been easier to hate her. Instead, I found myself asking questions not accusatory but curious. What did she see in him? What did he confide that he had not shared with me? Her answers were thoughtful, sometimes painful. She spoke of his fear of mediocrity, of his quiet anxiety about living up to his father's expectations, of his longing for a life that felt less choreographed. Listening to her, I realized how many of those vulnerabilities I had dismissed over the years as distractions from our mutual goals. I had loved Caleb's ambition because it mirrored my own. Perhaps I had failed to notice when ambition became armor. The turning point did not come from a grand gesture but from a simple realization. I did not want a partner who loved me by default. I wanted someone who chose me in full awareness of alternatives, someone whose certainty was not born of convenience but of conviction. A week later, Caleb asked to meet. He looked different, less polished, more uncertain, and for the first time I saw him not as the inevitable future I had constructed, but as a man standing at a crossroads of his own making. He told me he had ended things with Elena because he could not reconcile his history with me with the intensity he felt for her. He said he wanted to fight for us. I listened, heart steady, and understood that this was the moment that would define not just our relationship but my sense of self. If you choose me because I'm familiar, you will resent me, I said gently. If you choose her because she's new, you will romanticize what you lost. You need to decide who you are without either of us. His expression crumpled not in anger, but in dawning comprehension. For once, I was not offering to negotiate terms. I was offering him freedom, even if it meant losing him entirely. In the end, we did not reconcile. Caleb left the city months later to expand his company's West Coast branch. And from what I heard, he and Elena eventually parted ways as well. Our engagement party photos remained online for a while, digital ghosts of a future that never materialized, before quietly disappearing. I moved into a smaller apartment downtown, adopted a stubborn rescue dog named Atlas, and continued building a career rooted not in prestige but in purpose. The ache of loss did not vanish overnight. It softened gradually, like a bruise fading from deep purple to pale yellow. What surprised me most was not the pain of betrayal but the empowerment of clarity. Caleb's confession, as devastating as it felt in the moment, had forced me to confront the complacency in my own heart. I had been sleepwalking through a life that looked impeccable on paper, mistaking alignment for intimacy, inevitability for love. Losing him dismantled the illusion and gave me the opportunity to rebuild on firmer ground. Years later, when I did fall in love again, it was not with someone inevitable. It was with someone deliberate, someone who asked hard questions, who challenged my assumptions, who chose me with eyes wide open. And when he whispered my name in the quiet of night, there was no hesitation, no confusion, just certainty. And I understood then that the fracture I once feared had not destroyed me. It had reshaped me into someone unwilling to settle for anything less than a love that did not drift in the dark.